So welcome, morning, and happy Thanksgiving if you are celebrating today. So over the last 12 months, we've been raising awareness of the new Personal Information Act by running a number of webinars. I'm sure some of you attended the event we ran at Pier 6 several months ago. We had Alexander White, the Bermuda Privacy Commissioner, with us, who is our guest speaker. The PIPA was passed in July 2016. However, the compliance date comes into force on the 1st of January. So as I'm sure you're aware, it is literally only a matter of weeks away now. Symptai Consulting is a sister company of ours. Its roots are in Jamaica. However, they've been supporting companies in Bermuda for several years now on all areas of compliance, AML, and cyber. Symptai have a team of certified privacy experts with over 50 privacy implementations under their belts. So I don't want to steal too much of Stuart's presentation, but we can make the compliance part of it really easy for you by delivering a privacy officer as a service, which is really cost-effective way of ensuring you're compliant. Depending on your size, I suspect it will be less than dinner for you and a friend at Port of Call. I was there last night, so I hope it is. With that, I'll hand over to Stuart Hilton, who leads the privacy compliance team at Symptai. Stuart, over to you.
Thanks so much, Chris. And I hope I can catch dinner there as well. Well, welcome everyone. I do appreciate your time and joining today as we talk about PIPA compliance, or PIPA, depending on how you choose to pronounce it. And also I do want to wish persons happy Thanksgiving if you're celebrating Thanksgiving today, or at least having a Friendsgiving that you're allowed to have a good meal with friends. We are going to quickly talk about an overview of PIPA, make sure that we set the context, we set the stage so that everybody's aligned with what are some of the focus areas under the law. We'll go through a quick checklist for you to understand what are some of the ways that you can demonstrate compliance with the law, because as much as the law has various guiding principles, there are some things we can do to show that we're addressing those principles. So I do want to go through that as a checklist. Here are the items, and you can, of course, go through the items together with us to say, yes, I have this, I don't have that, so it might be something you have to work on. And then talk about designating a privacy officer. Because as Chris mentioned, we do have an offering to help clients with your privacy officer designation, as well as using it as the role to oversee and implement what is your privacy program. Now, privacy, as we talk about PIPA, PIPA being Personal Information Protection Act, you will hear the term privacy tend to be used synonymous with protection. Privacy in itself is really just that, the idea that persons can be left alone and persons have a right to how their information is being used. So your organizations, as defined under the law, do have an obligation to ensure that they are recognizing those rights that you have as an individual for your data, whether you're an employee or whether you're a customer, a vendor. Once you're an individual, you have these rights, as well as the idea that the organization is able to respond to what are your rights and being able to clearly articulate how they are respecting those rights. So PIPA, the Personal Information Protection Act, is providing what are the expectations for organizations in Bermuda to operate under in order to respect the rights of individuals and to adequately protect the data or information about people. We don't want a situation where an organization has taken on information from customers or employees and they have no way of clearly showing what they are doing to protect the rights of the individuals and ensure that the data about them or the information about them is misused. Because we do know internationally that has happened. Companies misuse persons' data, companies have been guilty of not adequately protecting it, and therefore, there may be a data breach or a personal information breach that could cause harm to people. And that's what the privacy law or the personal or PIPA is intended to do, really to help protect people, protect the information about them, and inadvertently or indirectly protect the people themselves. With that, there come 12 principles. And we are going to talk about the minimum requirements from these 12, because in focusing on what the minimum requirements from the 12 are, I do believe that you get through detail work coverage for the other 7. So you're going to see the 5 minimum requirements here. Now, when I say minimum requirement, we're saying that at a minimum, every organization must adhere to these 5 principles. And as I mentioned before, by adhering to at least these 5, you're going to get some byproduct that covers the other 7. And I'll talk about how so that you're clear. Which is why I know, if we were to really get into all 12, we'd be here all day. And as much as I know you love spending time with me today, I figure you do want to get to that Friendsgiving or Thanksgiving dinner today. Responsibility and compliance. And what you see is my abbreviated version of what it means. If you go onto the privacy.bm website, you will see an extended definition as well as excerpts from the law in order to understand the details of what is there. But at the core, responsibility and compliance is really to ensure that you have adopted reasonable measures to address what are your organization's compliance obligations. So your organization, if you're collecting information or you're using information about people, whether it be customers, employees, or otherwise, could be your stakeholders, board members, or otherwise, you have to, as best as possible, put in mechanisms to protect that information. And you also have to appoint or designate rather a privacy officer. And we'll talk about that privacy officer in more detail towards the end of the presentation. But let's talk about how we can show compliance or demonstrate our compliance with this requirement. At the highest level, you want to have a framework, but if we don't develop a protection framework, then we may at least have a personal information protection policy. And your organization may have it already in the form of a data protection policy, or you might have an information security policy that has a data protection section. So you can potentially check that off the list at the highest level, but a detailed review would be great in order to ensure that you are still addressing the specific requirements of the law. So that's a starting point. You may have something already in place that says, here's how we handle information about people, here's how we secure it, and that is part of your personal information protection policy, which should be clearly articulated to all employees. So think about as well, while you do have this document available, if you do, or if you don't, once the document exists, we need to ensure that all of our people, all of our employees, or board members, or all of our stakeholders are aware that this exists and they understand what it is requiring of us to do. And that policy, of course, is going to address all the other parts of what are the PIPA requirements, because it's going to talk about how do we ensure that there's fairness, how do we ensure that there's proportionality, purpose limitation, breach of security. It's going to be an extensive policy that speaks to all the requirements of PIPA. In appointing a data protection officer or designating that role to somebody in the organization or somebody externally, you may end up with a job description as something to help show that we've recognized this role, management has signed off on it, and it exists. Here's a person that we can name. Their name may exist as well in your privacy notice, but I'll talk about that a bit more on the next slide. If you don't have something as detailed as a job description, you may have a RACI matrix, which is your responsible, accountable, consulted, or informed. A matrix that says, here are the different roles and responsibilities in our organization that are overseeing privacy compliance. If you're a large organization that is processing a lot of data, multiple types of data, this may be in the insurance field, it may be in finance, even education may sometimes look at a lot of different information. Health looks at sensitive data. You may end up, and you're processing a large amount of it, meaning many customers, many employees, you may end up having a privacy steering committee, and therefore they must be overseen by a charter. Smaller organizations, if you're a team of 2 or 3 persons, you most likely are not going to have the capacity to build out a team like that, but you're still going to designate a privacy officer. So your job description would suffice, but a large organization that, privacy really is a big risk, then you're going to put in an additional layer of having a privacy steering committee that meets on a regular basis to oversee what our privacy requirements and how we're acting on those requirements on a regular basis. In addition to these areas that are covered within the organization, third parties who do processing on our behalf, meaning they have the personal information that we have collected from our customers, and they may store it, for example, like Amazon Web Storage, or you may share it with a third party for analytics. You don't have an in-house data analytics team, for example, you've outsourced that to a third party. What you want to ensure is that you're overseeing their compliance with the law as well, because the organization, which is the essential controller of the data, has a responsibility to manage, has a responsibility to ensure that we're not sharing data with any, or sharing information with any third parties who are not going to be responsible. So you do want to control what they're doing with your information by having a third party processing agreement in place. That may start off as a template that has your general clauses that speak to things like, how do we transfer information securely? How do we expect that third party to handle the personal information? What happens if they have a breach? How soon should they notify us if there's a breach of our information under their control? So your agreement is going to outline all of these expectations to your third party, and they sign to it, of course, to say we are going to meet these requirements on a regular basis. And you do want, as best as possible, depending on the nature of the relationship, to get assurance reports from them. And those reports could be coming in the form of a self-attestation, meaning they have checked it themselves to say, yes, we have good physical security in place. We have trained our staff about privacy expectations. Only the right persons have access to your data in our organization, etc. So they may check that off, or they may, depending on how large they are, have assurance reports from reputable third parties that say we have tested this organization or this third party using ISO 27001 as a standard, ISAE 3402 or other recognized standards, SOC 2 compliance example, and we have assessed them and we agree that these things are working effectively in their environments. And you can review that to say, yes, I feel comfortable that they are still doing what they need to do to meet our expectations. Given that we have to have reasonable measures to respect the rights of individuals, we may also include procedures for handling individual requests. So each time an employee or a customer reaches out to our organization to ask for their information, we now activate those procedures to, as best as possible, respond to the person appropriately, to verify their identity, and to do that within a reasonable time, which is on the PIPA 40 days. Now, you may not necessarily have those procedures formally documented at the moment, but the idea is that over time, you do document step-by-step approach for addressing these needs so that you're responding to persons consistently and appropriately within that time. And finally, another thing that we can have in place to demonstrate, again, this is part of making sure that somebody comes knocking on our door and asks, what have you done to ensure your compliance? You can say, here's the evidence. You want to have an employee privacy training register or a certificate to show that they've completed training. You may have already done some organizational-wide trainings. You may have them even look at the training that's available on the privacy.bm website. But what you want to do to be able to validate and show that persons have conducted or attended this training is being able to certify them with, an official certificate of completion, or having a register that management signs to say, yes, I can verify that these persons have attended this training. Having persons sit on a YouTube video or a video on our website may not generate certificates of completion to verify that persons have done training. And you do want, as best as possible, to train them in the context of your own organization so that they understand how they impact privacy and the protection of information in their specific capacity. Because how a security guard affects data or information that's accessible is a lot different than how your compliant person or your HR person may affect the protection and privacy of information in your remit. So This is that first part of the checklist. We will be sharing the recording after this session. So of course, if you want to be able to jot down these things and check it off yourself, then you will be able to look back at this later. No need to have to quickly scribble it down at the moment. We'll now talk about fairness and what are things that you can demonstrate. And again, I have the little checkbox there that you can check it off to say, yes, I have these items. There is a lot more that can be done. Don't get me wrong, there is a lot more that can be done to really enhance your privacy management. But at the minimum, I do want to say, let's focus on these areas. So that's why you'll see, for anybody who's just joining, that's why you'll see some of the principles grayed out, because the 5 that we're focusing on right now are your minimum requirements. For fairness, it is very straightforward. The idea is that we are only using data. It shouldn't be a case that we as an organization have taken information from an individual. We have said we are doing it to sell you a service or a product, but then we're using the information in a way that does not seem reasonable to them. For example, we all know about how Facebook was selling persons' information to places like Cambridge Analytica, or they are allowing Cambridge Analytica to use the platform to specifically target persons to influence presidential elections in the US. And I say this because persons would not have expected that to happen with the information they've made available on Facebook. The same happens in our organizations. If we have taken information to provide this good or service, do we then send it to a third party to do marketing campaigns on behalf of other companies, on behalf of themselves, or are they selling the information? Are they analyzing the information provided to profile persons? May not be expected by the individual, and that therefore is not fair. We should also be able to identify a specific, one or more specific lawful purpose for what we're doing. Could be that we have a legitimate interest, we have a contract, we have a legal obligation to do this. So of course, I know a lot of the companies in the financial space will talk about the requirements for AML in order to meet it, and you're saying that you have to get this information to meet your AML compliance obligation, and that is fine, but the point is we have to identify what lawful purpose we're using the information for. In order to do that and to clearly show it to persons as part of our demonstration for compliance, we say all of this in a privacy notice. So we clearly outline to persons what information we're collecting, why we're collecting it, what's the lawful purpose behind it, how it's being used, how are we retaining it, how long are we retaining it, when can persons make requests and how can they make requests, and who do they contact in the event they need to make a request. So that may even include your privacy officer contact information on the privacy notice. So that persons know if you want your rights to be adhered to, or if there's an issue or you need more information, here's contact information for the privacy officer. And privacy notices may come in many forms. Typically we'll hear about it on things like a website, but you may have a statement, a brief statement, or a privacy notice incorporated into your onboarding documents for customers. So if a customer is applying or somebody is applying for employment, you have a statement that says, in collecting your information, these are our obligations, and this is what we're respecting your rights. So it can come on the physical paper, it can come online, and you do have to think about, as you build out a flow of your data, what are the points that we need to communicate to persons what's happening. But I'll talk about that a little bit more as I mentioned our record of processing activity. This to me is the core document, or becomes somewhat of your Bible for managing privacy in your organization, because it is clear documentation that says, here are all the various business processes we have in place. Here's the personal information associated with that process, and it can be in categories such as contact information, demographics, financial account information. You can put it into categories rather than spelling out all of the details, but you get an appreciation of here's the information associated with that process. Where do we share the information? Is there any sensitive information associated with the process? How is it being secured? How long do we have to retain it? Is there any instances that we share it to overseas third parties? And those are all things you put into one document, and it's not going to ever be finished because we do have to maintain it. So I won't ever call it a complete document. It's live. If processes change, if there's new processes, if there's processes removed, then we do have to update that document, but it will provide what is a central repository for understanding what you communicate in your privacy notice, what you need to state in your privacy policy, and how and where you may find data in order or find information in order to respect the rights of individuals. Again, you can use employee privacy training registers and certificates to show that you have communicated these expectations to persons, and then conduct privacy audits on a periodic basis to check to see if we're still adhering to the requirements or to the processes outlined in our record of processing activities. Your privacy audit may not happen this year. Most likely it's not going to happen in the next year. You want to have your program up and running first, and then the year after or 2 years after, so about 2026 or 2027, is when you're going to do your first privacy audit to see, are all of these things still operating in the way that we designed them in 2024 or in 2025, depending on where you are today. Proportionality, very similar to fairness, is that we are ensuring as best as possible that we are only using personal information from the point of collection to use. We're only using personal information that is adequate, relevant to the process, and is not excessive. So I'm sure you may have experienced it at some point of interacting with an organization as well, that you go in to do business, somebody hands you a form or asks you to fill out the information online about yourself, and it asks for just that one bit of information that you have to say, why would they need this? And in asking yourself that, you now have, of course, the expectation that you can ask the person who's requesting this information from you to explain what is necessary. And being able to explain it should come from your record of processing activities. That persons know, I have asked you for your date of birth rather than just asking what year you were born, because I have an AML compliance requirement to meet. That could be an example. So the point is, persons do have to look through this record of processing activities to see, based on the type of process, is the information that we're collecting and using about people adequate, or is it excessive? Is it relevant to the process, even if it's not excessive? Does this process still occur if we remove this information about a person? And the answer is yes, then it may be that that information is not relevant to that process and it is saved as a part of another process. Those things are communicated in our privacy notice, of course. As I mentioned, it is an external facing document that allows persons to understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. And then again, we conduct periodic privacy audits to see whether these things are still being met. So you've seen documents repeat themselves and ideas that we're still able to address multiple parts, because in addressing the record of processing activities requirements or proportionality, we will be able to cover things like your purpose limitation. By having documented all of this in your privacy notice, we've covered the requirement for privacy notice. As I mentioned earlier, I do think by having a comprehensive way to meet your minimum requirements, you will see that you are also addressing those additional requirements, the other 7 outside of the 5, so that you're covering all 12 key principles. And for anyone who has probably seen the principles and wondering, but how do I actually do this? What I'm providing you are ways to demonstrate your compliance. Integrity of personal information ensures that as best as possible, we are maintaining the accuracy of personal information. There are some bits of personal information about people that may never change. You've collected date of birth, for example, that's never going to change, or I hope it doesn't change. You also, identification numbers most likely may not change. There is the possibility they can, but other bits of information about persons may not necessarily, may be a lot more fluid, like weight, that might change. If you have to collect somebody's weight, if you're a medical institution, you have to collect somebody's weight, then that might change over time. Do we have a process to allow persons to update their information, or do we have a periodic check to see whether their information has changed, like an address? I'm sure most organizations will have to handle persons' address information, and in some cases, even an email address. And when handling those things, that may change. I've had one email address for a very long time, but I know quite a few persons or friends who have reached out at some point and said, you know what, use this email address instead in the future. So do we have, for example, a records management procedure or procedures that allow us to update and manage records about people on an ongoing basis? So it instructs us, for example, whenever handling a customer query, verify their address, because that may change. That might be an opportunity. As they call in for a customer query, you can say, hi, Mr. Hilton, can we verify that your address is? As we share it, they may say, oh, no, that has been changed. Please update it on the records. And you can still go through your validation process in order to make sure that this address information is correct. And lastly, before we talk about the role of the privacy officer, there is, of course, a security safeguards. I do think that this part is a lot bigger than most of the sections in the requirements, because security is such an integral part of protecting data. And we understand how huge the cybersecurity landscape is. Your resiliency of your company is dependent. The resiliency of your company can determine whether the business fails or not in the cybersecurity space. Because if somebody attacks us, and even if it's not to get after personal information, if they're just trying to get the financials, it can cause huge damage. So there's so much that we have to do. Starting with, of course, having an information security policy or policies, because there may be subsections of your information security policy, like acceptable use, bring your own device, physical security. And I mention physical security because we do have to remember protecting information is not just in the digital space, it's also our physical files. I'm sure some organizations can speak to file cabinets of employee records or even customer records, and we have to ensure that that is protected, similarly to how we're protecting digital records that are connected to the internet. So your information security policy is one of the first things that you can use to help demonstrate by saying, here's how we are showing our commitment to securing and protecting the information that we have. You, of course, want to have an incident response procedure, which may even come as a subsection of your information security policy, that tells us how do we respond in the event of an incident, both in the physical space as well as the digital space. And that may be supplemented or complemented by a breach notification guideline, because we do know PIPA does require that if it does occur, we have a way to notify the individuals affected, as well as notifying the privacy commissioner without undue delay. So as soon as we become aware, we've done our check to understand the extent of what is happening, we have to start the notification process. And your breach notification guideline speaks to what is the information that you need to include, who needs to be notified, who needs to be part of the investigation, and how quickly we do it. It may even include templates for how you respond. So you've already pre-written something that we can use to tell individuals, this is how you've been affected by a breach, and here's what you can do to protect yourself. Here's what we are doing to help to protect you and to remediate the situation. That note, of course, as I mentioned, if you have a comprehensive approach to your minimum requirements, you can see that you're also addressing parts of your breach security requirements under the 12 principles. Similarly, your record of processing activity will state, how are we protecting the information based on where it is? So if we've said all of the information that we have about customers all of that information is in our email, you should have on that line, that record, what we're doing to protect email. Some of it is going to be very technical. Some of it is going to be very straightforward, like having a policy. Some of it may be, we have a firewall in place that is being administered by a qualified cybersecurity professional. So you do have to think about documenting those things that you can understand the risk. And why is this particularly important? I'll give an example of a situation that I had with a customer. I was working with a group of companies, and they had a wealth management business within the group. In that wealth management company, we had looked at the record of processing activities, and they had identified a core system that had all of their customer information. I was working with Group IT to identify what are the mechanisms in place to safeguard each of these core systems. And they said to me, every system is captured in our security event incident management platform, or our SEIM, SEIM, or some person might say SIEM. It's essentially your application that tracks all activities of any application or device that is logged in it. And large organizations will have this in place because security is a big issue. I was saying to them, okay, generate this list of all the devices that are captured, all the devices and applications that are captured in the SEIM, so that we can just do an audit to verify that everything is adequately captured. And they were like, listen, Stuart, we have other priorities we'll get to when we get to it. And for weeks, I was going to the group CIO, I was going to the CIO for that business, and everybody kept on saying, you know, we have other priorities. As much as I expressed the risk behind what was happening, the person said, yeah, man, Stuart, we'll get to it. Eventually, there was a situation where an employee of that organization left. They decided to download what was the customer database and carry it to a competitor. And we found out about this because persons started reaching out to the organization to say, I received this email from this person saying that they're no longer with your company and they are over here and they are encouraging me to do business with them at this place. This is wealth management, so it's common that persons believe they can walk with their client portfolio. So as far as this person was concerned, they did nothing wrong. I'm not saying they didn't do anything wrong. I am saying that they thought they were doing something completely normal in the space. What we couldn't do at that point was verify the extent of what the person did. Because I'm now sitting in the group CIO's office and saying, all right, let's bring up the SEIM and see what activity took place so that we can understand how many people were impacted and who was impacted. And everybody was like, yeah, it's only her clients that she pulled. She didn't pull the other wealth managers' information. And then we started getting emails from persons saying, I don't know who this is. And we recognized that she was not their wealth manager. They were another. So she, as far as we could tell, it was everybody's information that had been pulled. And this was showing that as much as they believed everything was covered, because by this time, another IT person calls and said, we never captured that system in the SEIM because the business did not want to include it. They didn't want to allocate the funds to it. But now they were finding the money to recover from the situation. So I say this because in your record of processing activities, you can help identify all of the mechanisms that are covering you, even when your threat may be persons within the organization. Because sometimes we put a bit too much trust and don't put in enough mechanisms to prevent internal threats, such as our own employees. Somebody who's disgruntled may be just as disruptive as a motivated hacker outside of our business. Again, we want to provide evidence such as training certificates or training registers. We want to do periodic security assessments. And this is very important because you will hear IT teams say, we are completely protected. We have all the latest technologies. We've continuously done training. We are updating things on a regular basis. And one vulnerability breaks through. And I'm not saying that the teams aren't doing everything they can. I'm sure they're working assiduously to protect your businesses. And in most cases, you're not even realizing some of the things that they are preventing on a day-to-day basis. But doing a security assessment, such as a penetration test, may identify vulnerabilities that they haven't gotten to because they're looking at so many different things. So doing a periodic penetration test, such as an external pen test or an internal pen test, as well as social engineering, phishing simulations, etc., help to verify the resiliency of your program, because you may do a test and it comes back to say, we could not find anything that was high risk in your environment. Good to go. We have now verified the resiliency of what we have in place. And we do that, for example, on an annual basis to continuously check because we know the threat landscape is forever evolving. Finally, periodic IT audits to check things like, is access correct? We have persons separated that are still accessing our systems, and periodic IT audits can help with that as well. And the point is that you've gotten a report from that that says, here is what your posture is today based on the scope of the review. So all of these things are ways that we can use to demonstrate compliance. And I think it's very important to do that because we want to, as best as possible, show anyone who has to ask us for it. And it could be in instances you're working with another organization, you can show persons, this is why I'm complying with PIPA, because I have all these things in place. Now, I did mention that I'll talk about the role of the privacy officer, because this is something that you have to designate in your organization. So every organization has to designate a privacy officer. This role is mainly there for oversight and for communicating with the privacy commissioner or the office of the privacy commissioner. They may take ownership of what are all your different privacy needs and obligations. In some instances, they may lead you through it. In some instances, they are going to do the things directly. But you do, of course, have to delegate this person because they are going to be able to communicate to individuals who are working with your organization how we're representing and respecting your rights. So it's a pivotal role in helping to manage compliance. And you will hear about the similar roles in other jurisdictions, like in Europe, under the General Data Protection Regulation, they call it a data protection officer. And that has very specific requirements for the role, but it's still here to oversee what is your compliance with the law. And I like to also talk about them being the enabler. Because when persons hear the term oversight, they almost quickly go to they're the whistleblower or they're there to catch me doing something wrong. The intention isn't to try to, aha, I got you. The intention really is to say, here are the things we can enhance to improve what we're doing. Because we want to get better over time. We don't want to have one program today and it stays stagnant because the threat landscape is evolving. So we have to evolve the program as well. Things that you can look out for as you designate your privacy officer are leadership skills, because this person should be able to communicate business needs alongside what are your obligations. It's not just the law takes precedence and we cannot operate a business. The law is never intended to do that. It is, how do we ensure that we are meeting our business obligations and continuing to operate, given that we have various stakeholders, but still considering the rights of individuals. They must be able to clearly communicate to you what are the needs, being able to interpret what the law says and how we're going to incorporate it into the business. They must have good project management skills, because there are times that we're going to have projects. We are working on developing a policy and there are different persons involved. That in itself is a project. So they should be able to self-organize and ensure that things are moving accordingly. And they have to problem solve, because privacy, you'll notice words like reasonable and adequate. Those things are interpreted based on the needs of your business. So what fits a large organization may not fit a small organization. What fits in the real estate space won't necessarily fit in the insurance space. So we do have to have problem-solving skills to adapt what is necessary, specific to that organization. As I mentioned, they should be able to understand privacy laws and communicate properly. But some of the certifications that you can look out for, these may be a plus at the moment because some of these privacy professionals are rare find. Some certifications you can look out for are the Certified Information Privacy Professional, CIPP, which is from the International Association of Privacy Professionals. It is a globally recognized professionals organization. Similarly, there's a Certified Information Privacy Manager. There is the CDPSE from ISACA. So if anybody is a part of ISACA or heard of ISACA, the organizational body for IT auditors, they offer a certification as well that is recognized, as well as the IPT from IAPP, CDPO, which is your Certified Data Protection Officer out of Europe as well. And I do want to lastly provide that they do have to have a good sense of legal, audit, IT, and risk management. Privacy is a risk. So risk management skills are key because they're going to be addressing items based on the level of risk. If we have a file cabinet filled with papers, filled with personal information about employees, we don't necessarily have to turn it into Fort Knox. We're not taking the highest level of restriction for everything. You have to then look at the risk, what is involved, based on the type of data, based on the volume, based on how you access the building. Is locking the file cabinet with a key adequate? Or do we need to put on an additional level of security by putting in its own room and locking it away? So you have two layers of security. Those are why you need risk management. That is why you need risk management experience, because we're not seeing immediately we're taking the highest level of security from day one, and therefore we can't access the information that we're working with. As Chris mentioned in the beginning of the conversation, we are offering a service to support this privacy officer role. So you can look at us as what would be your privacy officer, appointing or designating a representative from Symptai and Digital that is going to represent your organization and oversee what are your requirements. We put this into an acronym called AIM as our approach, AIM, where we advise, inform, and monitor you. Because advise is ensuring that we're getting all the right things in place, your policies, your procedures. We're doing privacy impact assessments to identify the risk, as well as keeping you informed, because there is going to be a point person in an organization that needs to know what's happening. Not just from what we're doing, but also understanding what is existing in the landscape, what privacy laws may have evolved that we need to be aware of, as well as how do we get customized training for our customer service reps, separate from customized training for our HR employees who are dealing with employee information. So that is part of the informing part. We have a team of certified privacy professionals who have been doing trainings for about 3 or 4 years, where we are partnered with the International Association of Privacy Professionals to deliver things like certified training. So the CIPM, CIPT, CIPP/E, we deliver all of those trainings, and we're the only organization that's partnered with the IAPP in the English-speaking Caribbean to deliver those trainings. So I can tell you that from a training perspective, we are well prepared. Finally, monitoring, because compliance is an ongoing process. Compliance is not a one and done, we've checked the box and moved on. It is, we have ways to continuously check whether things are moving as they should. Are we getting a lot of data? Are we getting a lot of information requests from our individuals? How quickly are we responding to them on average? What are some of the outliers? Are we having breaches? How quickly are we notifying persons about the breaches? What are we doing to improve that process? So that is part of the monitoring, because as I mentioned, privacy is not a one and done. Before I hop it over to any questions, I do want to share that beyond just a compliance effort, because I know persons will say, let's just check the box. I've heard it so many times. You will hear that, of course, that there are benefits. And I want to talk about those benefits directly now. Cisco has found that 95% of organizations have indicated that they get a privacy benefit that exceeds the cost of privacy. Experiencing what is a 1.6 times return on their privacy investments. And that's from various things. That could be from 94% of organizations say that customers would not buy from them. So if I don't trust you with my information, I don't feel comfortable giving it to you, I may not be able to do business with you. And that I think most people can relate to. If you've heard of the organization constantly having issues where it comes to handling persons' information, you will choose not to provide them your information. So this is a commercial benefit for your organization. And then finally, in the US, 86% of the general population has said data privacy is a growing concern. So it is something people have kept front and center. If we are being able to show persons that this is a top concern for us, which we know in 2023, CEOs around the world have indicated that privacy is a top concern, then if we are showing that commitment and clearly articulating how we're handling it, then persons will be able to respond accordingly to say, yes, I recognize you as a place to do business with. All of that, of course, can get managed as a part of your maximizing data value roadmap. you take an approach where you've started with this privacy, you start looking into managing the quality of your data in order to then realize the benefits of it, including being able to do analytics that are still within expectation of your organization to identify how to better meet the needs of your customers, which will also boost revenues because you're doing more business with them. They're more satisfied, they are feeling more engaged, as well as being able to identify what are operational efficiencies that can be gained because you're using the data to support your objectives and needs. Finally, I do want to mention that at Symptai, and we are partnered with Digicel. This is what we've spoken about today is part of our data privacy and protection offerings, but we do a lot of work in cybersecurity. That work is intended to help recognize and improve the resiliency of your operations, because we know how big the cybersecurity landscape is today. We do think an area that has been forgotten by most is the dark web. We'll hear about it. It seems like a theoretical place, but we sometimes offer dark web monitoring where we help to identify what may be information out there on your organization that does pose a threat to your organization. We were working with that organization in Barbados. There was an instance where their information had been put out on the dark web by different persons, and that information on the dark web was actually used to do an exploit on their company, meaning that they used what was administrator information that was posted on the dark web in order to attack their organization. But they, of course, were not aware that the information was out there. So there are different things that we offer as part of our cybersecurity and information security programs, or our consulting services, in order to help improve your posture to prevent those things from happening. Lastly, you can reach out directly to your account manager. So, Chris has been gracious to do the introduction for us. I know a lot of you may have gotten this information from Chris. Reach out to Chris to talk about how we can help. And even beyond the privacy officer as a service offering, there are multiple ways you can help. So reach out to Chris, reach out to your account manager at Digicel, or you can contact Symptai directly through info@symptai.com. But please feel free to reach out to your account manager at Digicel directly. I'll stop there to see if there's any potential questions before we close up today's session.
Split the two, with the two individual queries.
You've obviously described it too well, Stu.
And that is fine. I'll give us a second still to see if there's any questions that pop up in the person are thinking about them now. But as mentioned, we will share the recording to everyone who has registered for this webinar. You can share with anyone else who may have a particular need in this space. But of course, any questions, you can also reach out to your account manager to get in touch with us. There is some availability for us to meet directly with persons, not next week, but the following week, or sometime between today and tomorrow. So feel free to reach out. Let's have a quick chat to see how we can help you with your privacy needs.
I think your questions, Stuart, have just come when people are beginning to start thinking about lunch.
I already knew
We were just talking about that. I sent us.
It would have to be one a day.
I'm just seeing them pop up here. Okay. Thanks in advance for the recording. A question here, sorry. Thanks in advance for the recording. A slide deck too. I think we can make arrangements to share the slide deck as well. I don't want to promise us yet, but we make, find out from our coordinator whether we can actually send it through email to persons so you have it. I don't want to issue with sharing it. Thanks for the question. And another one, any information on personal data mapping as per PIPA requirements? Sure. You can use your record of processing activity as part of your data mapping process. The idea behind the data mapping is that you can visually represent how data moves through your organization or how the personal information moves. So what you can do to develop that, and I can provide a little snippet in what we share, is think about it in columns. You can have from your points of collection to use, storage, sharing or transfer, deletion. So if you have those columns, in each one you can place a statement about what happened. So we collect information about persons online. If we take, let's think about a process. We think about where we are asking persons to apply to jobs for our organization. A candidate may apply online, so their information is provided online as part of the collection. That information goes from the online space over to the HR department, who may print it and put it into a filing cabinet, and that's part of storage. And you'll put all those different pieces together to show how the information moves all the way through to deletion, saying that we delete this information after 3 years, for example, based on your particular requirements. That's a visual representation that helps you to identify the risk along each step of the process. Because the risk associated with the person applying online is different than the risk associated with somebody who walks in with a physical resume. So that data mapping, and again, I can provide a quick snippet in what we share, is there to help visually represent how each process uses information and how it moves through your organization. I would still say if you have to do something now to get started, do the record of processing activity. The data mapping may come as you start to mature, because we do have to address things right now in preparation for January 1. But your data map can be that visual representation that you build over time for each process, and at least your critical processes. All right, Chris, I'm not seeing any more questions. I do know we're coming on to lunch, so I think persons want to go ahead and start carving up the turkey. So I'll hand over to Chris to close out.
Stuart, massive thank you, and kind of just to reiterate what Stuart said, if there is interest to take the conversation on further, please do reach out either to your account manager. I know in a lot of instances I am your account manager because I saw the list of who's joined. So please do reach out to me, and we will circulate any information that you need. And if you would like to look at the as a service, then we would definitely be keen to have that conversation over the next few days. So, Stuart, massive thank you. I agree. I think we should let everyone disappear off for lunch. So, good. Okay, thank you. Thank you all.